A Missouri woman who conspired to kill her mother is now out of prison. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was released from jail.
They look at these papers and say, she's retarded. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
No friends all out with the fake, saying they love me but one in my plate.
Gypsy said her mother made her believe she had several disabilities.
Her daughter was in essence a hostage.
Going to Children's Mercy Hospital to see my beauties.
She got what she deserved?
According to Gypsy, yes.
Yeah. She could put whatever in my body and I wouldn't even know.
Startlingly, it was Gypsy who went online to announce, that bitch is dead.
It just feels good to be honest. His multiple personalities would come out. And he had talked to me one day and he was just like, I would like my other personalities to have a girlfriend. So I made up some individual personalities to match his other personalities.
She wants to get out. Ain't gonna happen.
Social media today, whether you look at Twitter, X, or Facebook, even TikTok, it's trending everywhere. Some are taking it to the internet to say how odd it is the people are treating her release. Some expressing their excitement, while others turning it into humor. Wednesday, on the social media platform X, some accounts posted, "How do we get Gypsy Rose to the 2024 Met Gala?" to petitions for her to have her own Super Bowl commercial, while others showing sympathy, saying they're excited for her to finally be free.
Welcome to BJ Investigates, a show I just created and might never do again. In last week's episode, we took a little stroll down memory lane all the way back to the early 90s to talk a little bit about Usher and his origin stories. We talked about all kinds of exciting and interesting things. Go check that out. In today's episode, we're going to take a little bit of a detour into something that's a little bit more of a current event, and that has to do with Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Now, she did actually end up getting sentenced to prison back in the day. And you might have heard of this story. There's been all kinds of documentaries and interviews and things going on about this. So today, Gypsy Rose is about to get out of prison, or maybe she's already gotten out at the time that this comes out. And I thought a lot of people were going to be asking, wait, hold on, remind me real quick what was going on with all of that. So I wanted to put together a little bit of a TLDR overview of the whole Gypsy Rose, Dee Dee Blanchard story, and I'll give some thoughts at the end. In early 1991, 24-year-old Claudine Blanchard and her 17-year-old husband, Rod, were expecting their first child, a baby girl they would name Gypsy Rose. Now, Rod had met Claudine when he was still in high school, and at just 17 years old, he had gotten Claudine pregnant. Shortly before Gypsy Rose's birth, in July of 1991, teenage Rod would tell Claudine he wanted a divorce, stating that he had gotten married for the wrong reasons. Gypsy Rose would be born in July 1991.
Very pretty.
Gypsy Blanchard always listened when her mother told her to do something.
How old are you? You're 1? I love you.
And Claudine would try to convince Rod to stay in the marriage, but it was a fail. It was a flop. So despite her best efforts, she couldn't convince the teenage husband to stay in the marriage. And it was at that point in time that Claudine decided to move back in with her dad. Her dad was married at the time, so she had kind of like a stepmom. So she took baby Gypsy Rose and they moved back in with the dad. And even though Rod didn't want to stay with Claudine in a marriage, he did choose to stay in Gypsy Rose's life. By the time Gypsy was just a couple months old, Rod says that Claudine had started showing some alarming signs of paranoia about Gypsy's health care. She was basically inventing non-existent medical conditions for Gypsy out of thin air. By the time baby Gypsy Rose was 3 months old, for example, Claudine was convinced that Gypsy had a condition known as sleep apnea, which prompted Claudine to rush the baby to the hospital repeatedly for overnight stays and monitoring. Now, I just want to note that the doctors found no sign of any problems, but Claudine was insistent and she continued to bring baby Gypsy Rose to the hospital for more monitoring and more tests. And that was really only the relatively harmless beginnings of these delusions that would turn insidious. As the months and years went on, Claudine's delusions about Gypsy's health would only grow. She would add more and more diagnoses to her daughter's list of non-existent health conditions for which she had no medical proof. For example, Claudine eventually decided that Gypsy Rose had muscular dystrophy and went on to force Gypsy Rose to use a walker to get around. And it didn't stop there. Sometime around whenever Gypsy was between 8 and 10 years old, she was riding motorcycles with her grandpa and she scraped her knee.
I did get into a motorcycle accident with my grandfather, and it skinned my knee.
Well, as a result of this literally scraped knee, Claudine forced Gypsy Rose to then use a wheelchair to get around.
And she took me to the hospital and then told me that the doctor gave her a wheelchair, and I have to be in a wheelchair now.
Her sister told me once, Rod, you know, Gypsy can walk. And I asked Dee Dee about it. She's like, yeah, well, you know, with her muscular dystrophy or with her disease, her muscles hurt sometimes. So sometimes she can walk when she's feeling okay, but it's progressive. It's gonna get worse. And it wasn't long after that they were, you know, they started moving further and further away. And you know, there's nobody there to question.
And right about now, you might be wondering why a young, perfectly healthy little girl would agree to do these things if she really didn't need them. But we'll get into all that eventually. So Gypsy Rose stopped going to school at a very early age. By the time she was in the 2nd grade, her last day of school was already behind her. She ended up having to teach her own self to read at home with children's books, including the Harry Potter book series. And it is widely speculated that Claudine's motivation for keeping Gypsy out of school was twofold. Number one, to further isolate her from any friends or possible support systems, which would make her a lot easier to control. And two, to further Gypsy Rose's abuse in private, where nobody from outside the home would be able to see evidence of Gypsy's suffering. Early on in Gypsy Rose's life, Claudine began to actively benefit from the make-believe health conditions she imposed on her daughter. She would bring Gypsy Rose to the Special Olympics events as a child, and she entered her into contests and sweepstakes for disabled children and their families. Now, not only did Claudine invent fake health conditions, but she would also lie about Gypsy Rose's age, telling people that Gypsy Rose was younger than she actually was. When Gypsy Rose was 10 years old, she was crowned honorary queen of the Crew of Mid-City, which is a, quote, child-oriented New Orleans Mardi Gras parade. Okay, fine, whatever, honorary queen, it doesn't matter, but even then, Claudine had lied and told the local Mardi Gras crew that Gypsy Rose was only 8 years old, dishonestly reporting her age by 2 years to make her seem younger. And for y'all that don't know this and aren't aware, being a part of a Mardi Gras crew, especially in or around the New Orleans area, is a very big deal. I'm from Louisiana, so I kind of just have that inherently in my mind. We were not part of a Mardi Gras crew. It's something that's kind of reserved for high-class people or frankly rich people. It's not something that everybody can do. It's not something that everybody has the money to do. You have to pay to be in them and stuff a lot of times. So being crowned an honorary queen in this way would have been a very big deal in the social sort of cultural society where these two were living. And so it was another way that Dee Dee was socially, financially, and otherwise enriching herself off of frankly lying about her daughter's non-existent health conditions. Now, like I said earlier, eventually Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose would relocate to live with Dee Dee's father and his wife, which would be Claudine's stepmother.
Were you sad at all when you heard she was dead?
Me? I didn't believe it.
But this living situation was not a saving grace by any means. During this period of time, while they were all living together with Claudine's dad and his wife, Claudine was arrested for various, quote, minor offenses, including writing bad checks.
There was something else.
She was a very filthy person. If it didn't go her way, she'd see to it that you would pay. And did we pay? Paid a lot.
And Claudine and Gypsy Rose wouldn't be living there for long before the dad and his wife, who were technically grandparents to Gypsy Rose, would start to express concern and disapproval for how Claudine was treating Gypsy Rose. These confrontations about Claudine's mistreatment of her daughter would become a regular part of life when they lived together. Now, this next part is wild and innocent until proven guilty and all that, but the dad and the wife became suspicious that Claudine was actively poisoning the wife with Roundup while they were all living there.
Supposedly, she was giving her some Roundup in her food and stuff.
She was putting some poison in my food. the same thing she had put in the plant.
Monsanto, the chemical giant that makes Roundup. Monsanto CEO Hugh Grant is with us at the table.
Hundreds of people claiming they developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after using Roundup.
California couple who claimed a popular weed killer caused them both to develop cancer has been awarded a historic $2 billion by a jury.
But you can't escape controversy. The latest thing now, people criticized you for being the Frankenfood company. Now they're saying you're too successful at selling, and it's all very complicated. I just thought we'd start out by talking about how do you run your business for shareholders, defend your patent portfolio because you have a heavily patent-dependent business, and maximize profits and not be seen as a bad guy and something as essential to all of us and to the world as the food business.
Well, thank you for that framing.
Now with this new information, with the emails that came out, hopefully that'll show the world how reckless Monsanto has been with people's health.
It only gets better.
And she wound up, she stayed 9 months in bed. After that, she couldn't get up. I didn't think she was going to make it.
And they confronted Claudine about this, too. But facing scrutiny, transparency, and confrontation was not something Claudine took kindly to, so she moved up out of that house as soon as she could. Not only did she move out, but that's around the time she changed her name from Claudine to Dee Dee. Now, the stepmom would later claim that she suffered from a whole bunch of chronic health problems during that time, but experienced miraculous and immediate recovery when Claudine, aka Dee Dee, and Gypsy moved out.
That's evil.
So Claudine took her daughter, Gypsy Rose, to live in public housing in Slidell, Louisiana, which is like a suburb of New Orleans. And there, they received government funding from taxpayers based on Gypsy Rose's make-believe medical conditions. Now, I guess it's possible maybe I just missed it, but from what I was able to find in my research, it doesn't look like Dee Dee/Claudine actually had a real job of her own at this time. So she was literally just accepting handouts from taxpayer-funded government programs because she imagined that her daughter had something wrong with her.
Some royal mashed potatoes.
But she did keep herself busy, though. During this time, she would constantly be making up new, delusional, non-existent diagnoses for Gypsy and traipsing across the tri-state area to visit unsuspecting specialists. And it's really important to note and just remind y'all, none of these specialists ever really found anything conclusive about the health conditions because, like I already said, Claudine Dee Dee was making them up.
The doctors who were positioned as there to help her didn't help her.
But Dee Dee was insistent and persistent that her delusions were correct, which resulted in Gypsy being subjected to basically medical torture for her entire childhood and well into her adulthood.
Gypsy grew up in essentially an alternate reality to what the rest of us live.
Make no mistake, she was abused, not only by her mother, but by doctors and medical professionals who refused to deny these unnecessary treatments. One doctor eventually would get suspicious of this whole scheme, and we'll talk about him specifically in a minute. But when he originally brought these suspicions to other doctors, the other doctors were like, no, treat them with golden gloves. This complete and total utter lack of diligence resulted in literally decades of medical abuse. So Hurricane Katrina allegedly apparently destroyed their free housing in 2005, so Dee Dee took Gypsy Rose to live in Missouri. By 2008, this scammer had finagled her way into another free house from Habitat for Humanity. And y'all, by this time, anybody who looked at Gypsy Rose would have probably believed that something must have definitely been wrong with her health.
It is the perfect town.
It's Mayberry. We're moving to Mayberry.
I remember my mom had gave me this little glass house, and she said, one day this will be real. And now it finally is.
The Blanchards moved into that house, built by Habitat for Humanity. A wheelchair ramp was built just for her.
By the time she was like 14 years old, she was basically bald-headed.
Which is, again, we love bald.
She was small in general, but also was very thin and frail for her age, probably because she wasn't allowed so much as to stand up or walk, even in her own house, and her diet consisted of pretty much Pedialyte well into her 20s. She was still playing with dolls and wearing very juvenile children's clothing well into her teens, even though she didn't want to wear those clothes because her mother was forcing her to wear them. She was also extremely pale, probably from all of the unnecessary medications combined with malnutrition and perhaps lack of sun exposure. She was exclusively using a wheelchair to get around. Even if she wanted to walk, Dee Dee would force Gypsy Rose to use the wheelchair. And Dee Dee would often supplement this child cancer patient look with an also unnecessary oxygen tank. To top it all off, Dee Dee made Gypsy Rose wear the thickest, ugliest, most outdated old lady glasses imaginable, which were far from trending at that time. And just to reiterate, this was all completely made up or completely caused by Dee Dee's abusive delusions. For example, the reason for Gypsy's bald head, Dee Dee claimed the, again unnecessary, medications would cause Gypsy Rose's hair to fall out. But Dee Dee was actually shaving Gypsy Rose's hair regularly to keep this bald appearance. The reason for Gypsy Rose being toothless? Oh, Dee Dee would use topical numbing agents, including before Gypsy Rose's dental appointments, which made Gypsy Rose salivate all over the place looking like she was drooling. Coming as a surprise to no one, Dee Dee did invent a diagnosis in her world of make-believe that Gypsy Rose had defective salivary glands. Somehow, someway, she was able to eventually convince a surgeon to remove Gypsy Rose's salivary glands, which, when combined with Gypsy's unnecessary seizure medication, caused her teeth to fall out one by one. And maybe this is just a coincidence, but this is when the free stuff really started pouring in for Miss Dee Dee Blanchard. Now, the full list is very, very long, but just to give you a few examples of the way that Dee Dee was able to financially and otherwise enrich herself off these made-up delusional health conditions that didn't actually exist. For one, they would always stay in Ronald McDonald House whenever they would go place to get these treatments that Gypsy Rose did not need. They were routinely awarded free flights to see doctors at children's hospitals where Gypsy Rose received more unnecessary medical treatments in the form of literally torture, also for free. She was a Make-A-Wish Foundation kid. They got free trips to Disney World, including the lodging and the park admission. She had free backstage passes to all these concerts, including Miranda Lambert, who was huge at the time.
Yes, she did. Look at this $3,500 check from the singer's personal account, but that wasn't all.
Dee Dee was living it up. She was living in the lap of luxury off of making these conditions up.
I just couldn't lie to him anymore.
Now at this point, the obvious question on many people's minds is, why on earth would this girl Gypsy Rose go along with this ridiculous charade at all? The answer? She didn't want to. And there were many times she tried to break this forced character. There are many types of control that people like Dee Dee can try to assert over a victim like Gypsy Rose. Some of these types of control are legal control, mental and or emotional control, and of course physical control. Legal control is when somebody has legal decision-making authority over another person. In Gypsy Rose's case, she was pretty much SOL until she was 18 years old. Dee Dee was able to forcibly control Gypsy Rose as her child because Gypsy Rose simply could not leave or escape. Gypsy Rose also couldn't really tell any of her friends at school or in public because Dee Dee had pulled her out of school so young. There was really nobody to tell. Dee Dee was in the sole legal position to force Gypsy Rose to take these harmful medications and undergo harmful treatments, including literally surgeries. And during the time that Gypsy Rose was a minor, the unnecessary medications would be wreaking who even knows what kind of physical and mental havoc on her young, impressionable body and mind. Not only did Dee Dee control Gypsy Rose's schedule, her socialization, and the medication she took, but she also controlled her diet, forcing Gypsy Rose to eat children's liquid nutritional supplements well into her 20s.
My tube site is finally all healed.
Looks great. Now, Dee Dee also controlled Gypsy Rose's wardrobe, her media consumption, and her education or lack of access to it. She was in complete control of Gypsy Rose for 18 straight years, and it was, quote, legal. Then there's this mental and emotional control element, and this would be built up over the first 18 to 22 years of Gypsy Rose's life when she couldn't leave. At some point, Dee Dee even forged a copy of Gypsy's birth certificate, moving her birth date from 1991 to 1993. Eventually, she would forge another copy of a birth certificate, moving the birth date from 1991 or 1993 back again. to 1995. And I'm not really sure exactly what Dee Dee's intentions were with forging this birth certificate, but the effects were twofold. For one, it made people think that Gypsy was younger than she actually is. And perhaps more significantly, it made it seem like Gypsy was a minor for several years longer than she actually was, allowing Dee Dee to maintain control legally, even though it was illegal, over Gypsy Rose's health care. And Claudine Dee Dee lied so much about Gypsy's age that Gypsy Rose herself didn't even exactly know how old she was for like 14 years of her life. Okay, wait, this is really starting to sound familiar. Y'all remember them twins? Lima's sisters? Lima's sister she cares so much about?
Hey everyone, this is our new YouTube channel.
That had altar switches at the exact same moment that the police had to come deal with, and Lima's at the wedding on the phone with the face, all that, remember them?
They've now been successfully diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder.
And when or if those methods of control failed, Dee Dee would fall back on Old Faithful: physical control. It is reported that Dee Dee would forcibly hold Gypsy Rose by the hand at all times when they were out in public. Sometimes Gypsy Rose would even disagree with Dee Dee about her health in front of others, or she would speak in a way that revealed her true mental competence was far beyond what Dee Dee wanted others to believe.
Even in videos I've seen since then, I'm like, yep, it's the same thing. It's like she's holding her hand.
And at those times, Dee Dee would mercilessly squeeze Gypsy Rose's frail little hand, crushing her knuckles and cracking them in pain. When Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose were in private, Dee Dee would mercilessly assault Gypsy Rose, hitting her with various objects, including her open hands and coat hangers. And I just want to give one example of how Dee Dee exacted these multiple levels of control, often employing them all at once. So after Gypsy Rose had officially legally turned 18, she did make at least one possible attempt to escape Dee Dee. At a cosplay convention event in 2011, Gypsy Rose left the convention center and went to a hotel room with a man that she had met at the event. Eventually, Dee Dee realized that she could not find Gypsy Rose, and somehow she did track her and this guy down. Dee Dee comes busting in the hotel room where Gypsy Rose, who's legally an adult, and this man who she had just met were staying, and Dee Dee brought with her a copy of that forged birth certificate. She threatened to call the police on the man for taking advantage of a disabled minor, and the guy quickly wanted nothing more to do with Gypsy Rose, and they went their separate ways. Well, once Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose were back at home, the abuse continued as Dee Dee took a literal hammer to Gypsy's laptop in a violent rage. She continued her violent mania by threatening to, quote, do the same to Gypsy Rose herself if she ever tried to defy Dee Dee again. And as is her pattern, it did not end there. After that episode of unhinged lunacy, Dee Dee leashed and handcuffed Gypsy Rose to her bed for at least 2 weeks. Eventually, Dee Dee did tell Gypsy Rose that she had filed paperwork with the police, claiming Gypsy Rose was mentally incompetent. This led Gypsy Rose to believe that if she ever tried to escape from Dee Dee's hellish abuse ever again, that nobody would believe her.
She'd hit me with a coat hanger, or her palm. And I had to take so many slaps for depending on how severe it was that I did.
Now I know what a lot of y'all are thinking. Okay, fine. But with all this lying and delusion to this plethora of doctors across several states, how didn't a single person notice this or try to intervene? And okay, you know what? Good question. They did. This one doctor, a pediatric neurologist who Dee Dee went to in Missouri, was not convinced that Gypsy Rose had muscular dystrophy. He even called the other doctors that Dee Dee had listed in Gypsy Rose's medical chart. But when he called those other doctors, they confirmed his suspicion that nobody had ever actually diagnosed Gypsy Rose with muscular dystrophy. Now, that doctor in his investigation was able to find a bunch of other holes in Dee Dee's story and eventually concluded that in his medical opinion, Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard herself might actually be the one suffering with a serious health condition known as Munchausen's by proxy.
One of the things was a big discrepancy was that for a person that has not walked for 9 years, for years, she should have technically almost no muscles in her lower extremity. But she did have muscles that looked quite normal.
Now, they've changed the name of that, but that's what he was calling it at the time. And I'm not a doctor, and this is not a medical channel, but the TLDR layperson's definition is Munchausen syndrome is when somebody genuinely believes they have one or more very serious medical conditions which causes them to seek unnecessary medical treatments and interventions. And Munchausen's by proxy is kind of the same thing, except instead of the person imagining up delusional, non-existent things about themselves, they imagine it about someone in their care. And I can't put my finger on it, but this really sounds familiar. In any event, this doctor caught Dee Dee in some lies about Gypsy Rose's health care, but he chose not to report Dee Dee to social services. For one, he claimed that the other doctors had told him to treat Dee Dee and Gypsy with golden gloves, whatever that means.
Analyzing all the facts, and after talking to a previous pediatrician, there's a strong possibility of Munchausen by proxy, with maybe some underlying unknown etiology to explain her symptoms.
We have a system, which is a big integrated system, that decided to adopt her and bring her, support her. So many people looking at her, knowing the history, knowing what she was going through, knowing what she went through, I would have been rejected at the spot. So all what I could do is put that in my note.
And for two, he doubted that the authorities would even believe him or take him seriously at all, given the drastic steps that Dee Dee had taken to make Gypsy Rose appear sick and disabled.
Nobody in the system ever said anything about it, and I didn't see it right to keep going and convincing other people, oh, something is not right here.
In 2009, someone finally reported Dee Dee to the police through an anonymous call, but don't sigh in relief just yet. The tipster told the cops that they thought Dee Dee was lying about Gypsy's health conditions, and as evidence, the tipster stated that Dee Dee had repeatedly given different names and birth dates for both herself and her daughter. Well, the cops show up to do a wellness check at the house, and Dee Dee admits to lying. But she tells cops that she had a good reason. She claimed that she was lying in various places to, quote, make it harder for her abusive ex to find her and Gypsy. Okay, now this is undeniable. It's really starting to sound familiar.
After that, don't she put in the internet and expose them? They just destroy it.
We saw.
I hope that she won't get those results because that's what she does. She takes everything, whatever happening, and put it on the internet.
Dolly, you mind if I ask you a few questions?
Yeah.
Okay. You know what day it is today?
No, I don't. I don't have a computer. I don't have the bracelet, so
You know where you're at?
I'm in Tulsa.
Tulsa? Okay. You know how long you've been here? Where were you before this?
In California.
But basically, Dee Dee again is able to lie and convince the cops that she was lying for a good reason, so she used a lie to cover up her lie or whatever. But that same year is when Gypsy Rose officially turned 18, in July 2009. But the forged birth certificate allowed Dee Dee to keep legal control over Gypsy for an extra 4 years. Dee Dee would go on to commit even more crimes to keep legal control over her daughter after that time, especially with respect to her medical treatments. So at some point, Dee Dee forged another document, this time a power of attorney over Gypsy's healthcare decisions. And in my opinion, this step was really the final nail in Gypsy Rose's coffin of abuse, because it allowed Dee Dee to keep control over Gypsy Rose's healthcare decisions and treatments and all of that well far beyond whenever Gypsy Rose had actually reached adulthood. It's literally giving Jamie Spears and Linda Omar. I just can't deny it anymore.
Can you stand up against this wall?
Please, this not can go public.
Gypsy Rose claims she never signed that power of attorney. It was a forgery, but she also knew that nobody would ever believe her if she said that. In an interview with Dr. Phil, Gypsy Rose told Dr. Phil that her mother Dee Dee would threaten her with these forged documents routinely. She would also tell Gypsy Rose that she, quote, had paperwork to prove that Gypsy Rose was mentally incompetent and nobody would believe her if she tried to basically snitch about Dee Dee. Well, long story short, Gypsy Rose ends up teaming up with another new boyfriend that she met on the internet, and she told him all about her struggles, especially with her mom. Now, that boyfriend took some pretty drastic steps of his own to eliminate Dee Dee, and he's currently serving a prison sentence for that. Gypsy Rose also pled guilty for her role in the whole incident, and it appears that she is remorseful for the decision and she wishes that she could take it back. She was sentenced to prison, and recently, back in September, a judge granted parole, so she's out of prison early and she won't have to serve her entire sentence. But even during the trial for that whole thing, after Dee Dee was long gone, Gypsy Rose was constantly confronted with the consequences of Dee Dee's illegal schemes and scams. During the discovery process, for example, Gypsy Rose couldn't even get the hospital to turn over her own medical records to her because of this forged power of attorney that Dee Dee had signed against Gypsy's consent. And Dee Dee was working hard from beyond the grave because she had actually put someone else in control of Gypsy Rose's healthcare decisions in the event that something were to happen to her. So the hospital was like, no, we can't release Gypsy Rose's medical records to her. We can only release them to this family friend in the power of attorney that Gypsy Rose never even signed. Obviously, y'all, and if it's not obvious, I just want to be very clear. I cannot condone Gypsy Rose's actions or her boyfriend at the time's actions. We didn't really spend a lot of time getting into what all happened, and I really think that's because it's really been covered a lot, and why would I say something that's already been said? But I cannot condone that type of actions. I cannot condone taking away somebody else's life in that way or any type of violence or anything like that. But there is a large part of me that does kind of understand what circumstances would lead a person to believe they didn't have any other options. Again, she shouldn't have done that, and even she admits it now. She wishes she didn't do it, Gypsy Rose. It just kind of leads me back to the same thing that I've been covering for 3 years. It's like when you take away someone's most basic and fundamental right, which is the right to live a life that's authentic to them without hurting other people, but their autonomy and the autonomy over their own healthcare decisions and stuff like that. And then, there's no end in sight. There's no end date, because even though you are a grown adult legally, somebody else can decide for you. I can understand feeling frustrated. I could understand how the circumstances would lead a person to feel like they didn't have a lot of other options. And in fact, Gypsy Rose did not have a lot of other options. We see what happened when she tried to go and, meet a friend or do whatever she was doing in that hotel room. I'm not sure what she was trying to do in there, but she was like at least 19 years old. She could have been like 21 years old. And, her mom hunted her down, busted into the room, had a fake birth certificate, and it's a whole entire life of this. Then the lady's telling her, if you try to ever leave me, I have paperwork that says you're incompetent and nobody's going to believe you. It's a really sad situation, and it makes me angry because this child was tortured and abused with the medical industry across state lines by many doctors who just didn't have the wherewithal to say, no, we're not going to continue running tests on this child. We're not going to radiate her anymore. We're not going to give her medications that are making her teeth fall out. It's bad enough that her own mother was abusing her, but then with taxpayer-funded insurance, with money that people give to organizations like Make-A-Wish Foundation out of the goodness of their heart, we had a child being abused. No one stepped in to save her or help her. The cops showed up and just believed the lie that Dee Dee Blanchard told, which was, oh yeah, we're lying, we're committing perjury to keep her dad from finding her. There's no evidence for that. And it really does remind me of a similar situation that I have seen recently, where authorities are lied to by loved ones and family members who are lying about the person's identity, about their health conditions, saying people have schizophrenia out of one side of their mouth and then they don't have schizophrenia out the other side of their mouth at a different circumstance. Then that victim tries to get help. No one helps them. Then that victim lashes out, understandably. Again, I cannot condone it, but I can understand it. And then that victim has to be the one that gets taken off in handcuffs. It's deplorable. It's reprehensible. It's unacceptable. I don't like it. I don't approve of it. Please don't send hate to anybody mentioned in this video. Gypsy Rose Blanchard has pled guilty, or at least she's admitted to some, fault in the situation, and she has served her time.
Like, where does she sort of fall on the responsibility spectrum?
We've talked about that actually a few times, and more or less, she said she's glad that she did go to prison because she would have probably stayed in that same pattern that her mom raised her to be. And with all the help and the classes that she took, she now recognizes that what's wrong from right. She has grown so much. It's unbelievable.
Not only did she serve her time in the however 20 years, 25 years that she was up under the abuse, the clutches, the talons of Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, not only was that time served, but she's also served time in a prison.
7 of her 10-year prison sentence for the 2015 murder of her mother.
I hope that Gypsy Rose is able to move forward from this. I think she's recently married. I am hoping that she is able to move on from this and to truly pursue her own dreams and live the life that she wants to live, because you know what? It's about damn time that she had that option. That's all I really had for today. In the meantime, facts ain't defamation. Love you, mean it. Okay, bye.
You think she got what she deserved?
According to
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, she got what she deserved.
All the brothers and sisters don't care about Dee Dee no more. Gypsy, she got cremated. She said, "What you want me to do with the ashes?" Everybody said, "I don't want her. I don't want her."
Flush them.
I told them, flush that in the toilet. You gonna pay for it? I'm not paying for it. You gonna get that? They said, "We can't afford it." I said, "Flush it in the toilet."
And it's going to be a big adjustment. But we're going to do Christmas. Got a Christmas tree. We're going to put that up. Got her so many gifts. I went overboard, actually. But it's so hard to describe how I'm going to feel, how I'm going to react until I'm in the moment. We booked a spa day. We're going to go get her pedicure, manicure, facial, haircut, colored if she wants, the works, bring her shopping. So it's going to be a whole day of events the following day. Maybe that night that she gets released, we'll do the Christmas with her, let her open a ton of gifts.
Mm-hmm.
They lost it.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing way better. But I didn't put their name on the report. I have to do that.
Correct, because that's why you gave a different name last time.
Yeah.
Yes,